The father's justice. I realized my wife was preparing to take everything from me, not when she lied, but when my neighbor had to leave a note on my car that said, "Don't go inside." My name is Edward Collins. I'm 63 years old, and for the past 4 years, I've followed the same routine every 3 months. A quiet drive back from my cardiologist's office. The rhythm of the road as familiar as my own breathing. That afternoon felt no different at first. The light stretched low across the street, catching the edges of the houses on Crestwood Lane, the place my wife and I had called home for over 3 decades. I pulled into my driveway, the tires crunching softly over gravel, and reached to turn off the engine when I noticed the paper tucked beneath my windshield wiper. It wasn't a flyer or a bill. The page was torn, the ink pressed deep, like it had been written in a hurry. I unfolded it slowly. "Don't go inside. Come to my house first. Frank Dalton." I looked up at my front door, the same one we had painted together years ago, standing quiet in the afternoon light. Nothing seemed out of place. No broken windows, no signs of trouble. And yet, something in the stillness felt wrong, like a room where a conversation had just ended too quickly. Frank had lived next door for 18 years. He wasn't the kind of man who wrote notes like this without a reason. I stayed in the driver's seat longer than I should have, the engine ticking as it cooled, asking myself a question I couldn't quite answer. Have you ever felt that quiet moment when everything looks normal, but something inside you says it isn't? I walked across to Frank Dalton's house without going inside mine, the gravel shifting under my shoes, the late afternoon light stretching long across his porch. He was already waiting, standing just inside the screen door, one hand resting against the frame like he'd been watching for me. He didn't waste time on small talk. He just nodded once and stepped aside. Inside, his living room was quiet, neat in the way a place gets when no one moves things anymore. A laptop sat open on the coffee table, the screen dim until he tapped the keys and turned it toward me. "I put up a camera after those package thefts last spring," he said, his voice steady, almost careful. "It catches part of your driveway, too. I didn't expect to see this." He clicked play. The footage showed my house from an angle I had never seen. The edge of my driveway, the front steps, the door opening. Sharon stepped out first. A second later, a man followed her. I didn't recognize him. Tall, mid-50s maybe, sleeves rolled to his elbows, standing closer to her than a stranger would. They spoke for a moment, not rushed, not cautious, like this wasn't new. Then she handed him an envelope. He slipped it into his jacket, touched her arm briefly, and walked back toward a gray sedan parked at the curb. The car pulled away without hesitation. Frank paused the video, then pulled up another clip, and another. Same day of the week, same time of day, different visits, but the same man, the same quiet exchange. I leaned closer to the screen, trying to catch something I had missed, a detail that would explain it, make it smaller, make it ordinary again, but nothing about it felt accidental. It wasn't enough to know what it meant, but it was enough to know this wasn't normal anymore. So why hadn't I seen it before? Frank didn't say anything for a moment after the last clip ended. He just reached over, tapped a few keys, and pulled up a document on the screen. It wasn't a video this time. It was a name, typed clean and centered, with an address and a title beneath it. "Anthony Blake," he said quietly, "estate attorney." I read it again, slower this time, letting the words settle in. Estate attorney. The kind of lawyer you meet when you're planning what happens to everything you've built, when you're deciding who controls it, who inherits it, who signs when you can't. I had never heard that name before, not once in 31 years of marriage. My wife and I had handled our paperwork years ago. Wills, accounts, everything done together, every signature side by side. There hadn't been a single conversation about changing any of it. No late-night discussions, no casual mentions over dinner, nothing left half-said or implied. And yet, there he was, standing on my porch, taking something from her like it already belonged to him. I leaned back slightly, the edge of the couch pressing into my shoulders, trying to line things up in a way that made sense. But the pieces didn't fit, not without leaving something out. Some of the most dangerous things don't start with an argument or a warning. They start quietly, in places where your name should be, but isn't. So I looked at that screen again, at the man I had never been introduced to, and started asking myself one question I couldn't ignore anymore. What exactly had she already decided, without me? Frank closed the laptop halfway, then reached to the side of the table and slid a thin stack of printed pages toward me, the kind of official forms you recognize before you even read a word. The paper was clean, stamped in the corner, the margins tight with legal language. "My daughter pulled this from the county filings," he said. I needed to be sure. I picked it up, my thumb catching slightly on the edge as I turned the first page. The title sat at the top in bold, formal letters. A petition. My name appeared beneath it, and then hers. Sharon Collins, petitioner. I kept reading, slower now, each line taking longer to process than the one before. The document stated that I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs, that my medical condition, my heart, the medication I had been taking, had led to episodes of confusion and declining cognitive stability. It described behaviors I didn't recognize, conversations I didn't remember having, a version of me that felt constructed, not observed. My hand tightened slightly on the paper. The room around me stayed quiet, too quiet, like the air had shifted and no one had told me. Then I reached the final page. There was a signature at the bottom, clean, familiar, written in a hand I had watched grow from childhood. Kevin Collins. I didn't move for a few seconds. I just looked at it, the curve of the letters, the way he always pressed a little harder on the last stroke of his name. It was real. There was no doubt about that. I thought about the last time we had sat together, the way our conversations had shortened, how something had slowly pulled away without either of us naming it. And suddenly, the question wasn't just what Sharon had done. It was what she had been telling him all this time and how long he had believed it. I set the papers down on Frank's table, but my eyes didn't leave that last page. Not really. The signature stayed with me, like it had been pressed somewhere deeper than the ink itself. Kevin Collins, my son. I tried to place the moment when things had started to change between us. It hadn't been sudden. There was no argument, no single phone call where everything broke. It was quieter than that. A shift in tone, a pause that lasted a second too long, conversations that ended before they used to. He had started calling less often. When he did, his questions felt different, more careful, like he was measuring something I couldn't see. I remembered a Sunday afternoon a year ago, sitting out on the back porch, the light hitting the railing just right, the two of us talking about nothing important. He had laughed at something small, the kind of easy laugh that comes when nothing is being held back. That version of him felt clear in my mind, and now it didn't line up with the man who had signed that document. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, staring at the floor for a moment. Because this wasn't just about money. It wasn't even about what Sharon had done behind my back. A person can take money from you. They can move it quietly, piece by piece, until it's gone. But what cuts deeper is when they take something you don't even realize you're losing, the way someone you love sees you. Somewhere along the way, Kevin had stopped seeing me as I was and started seeing someone else entirely, someone unstable, someone unreliable, someone he needed to protect himself from. And I couldn't stop asking myself, when did that version of me become more real to him than the one who raised him? I didn't go home that evening and ask questions. I didn't raise my voice, didn't hold up the papers, didn't look at Sharon any differently than I had that morning. I walked through the front door, set my keys down in the same place, and let everything stay exactly as it looked. The next morning, after she left, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold and made a call I hadn't needed in years. Rachel Moore. She answered on the second ring, her voice steady, familiar, the kind that doesn't rush to fill silence. I told her what I had seen, the footage, the documents, the signature. I kept it simple. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a brief pause, just long enough to feel deliberate. Then she spoke. "Do not confront her," she said. "Not yet." Her tone didn't change. "Don't move any money. Don't sign anything. Don't let her know you've seen any of this." I looked out the window while she talked. The yard still, the same as it had been for years, nothing visibly different. She's building something, Rachel continued. If she knows you're aware, she'll adjust. Right now, you have the advantage of being unseen. That word stayed with me, unseen. So I followed her instructions. I went through the day as usual. I spoke when spoken to. I kept my routines intact. I let the house remain quiet on the surface, while something underneath it shifted, slowly, into place. Because for the first time, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was waiting. And the only question left was, how much had she already set in motion while I was still standing still? Over the next several days, Rachel Moore went through our records the way a careful mechanic takes apart an engine, one piece at a time, nothing rushed, nothing assumed. We sat across from each other in her office, with bank statements spread in small stacks across the table, the afternoon light falling across the paper in long, pale strips. At first glance, nothing looked dramatic. There was no giant withdrawal, no single transfer big enough to set off alarms. That was the point. Sharon had moved the money slowly, $800 here, $2,000 there, then smaller amounts again, always spaced out, always ordinary enough to disappear inside a busy month. When Rachel added everything together, the total came to just over $240,000. The money hadn't vanished by accident. It had been guided, step by step, into a separate account, opened in Sharon's name alone, at a bank in another county. Then Rachel showed me the second part. Anthony Blake hadn't just been meeting with her casually. He had been preparing papers that would give Sharon control over everything if the court accepted that I could no longer manage my own life. In plain terms, it was simple. If I were declared incapable, she would be able to sign for me, move assets, make decisions, and shut me out of my own finances without asking again. The money transfers were one track, the court filing was the other, and both tracks were heading to the same place. I sat there looking at those pages, realizing this hadn't been impulsive. It had been built carefully, over time, which left me staring at one thought I could no longer soften. How much farther would it have gone if Frank hadn't seen that first envelope? I started with small cameras, the kind that don't draw attention, no blinking lights, nothing that would change how a room feels when you walk into it. I placed one in the home office, angled toward the desk where Sharon kept her laptop. Another went in the hallway, just enough to catch the filing cabinet. The last one faced the garage door, where paperwork sometimes passed through before it ever reached the house. I didn't rush the process. I moved carefully, choosing moments when the house was empty, when the sound of a drawer opening wouldn't carry. By the time everything was in place, nothing looked different, and that was the point. Then I waited. A few nights later, I sat in the living room with the television on low, the glow flickering across the walls, while my phone rested face down on the table beside me. When it vibrated, I didn't react right away. I let a few seconds pass before turning it over. The notification was simple. Motion detected. I opened the feed. Sharon was in the office, standing close to the desk, her posture relaxed, like this was routine. She opened the cabinet, pulled out a folder, and flipped through it with steady hands. Then she took out her phone and began photographing the pages one by one, pausing only long enough to make sure each image was clear. I watched without moving, the sound of the television continuing behind me, out of place now. Over the next few days, the pieces came together. The footage from Frank, the bank records Rachel had organized, the images from inside my own house. Each one alone could be explained, but together, they formed something that didn't leave room for doubt. I sat there that night, looking at everything laid out in front of me, understanding that I wasn't gathering questions anymore. I was building an answer, and the only thing left was deciding when to use it. Rachel sent the file to Kevin that afternoon, not with a warning, not with a long explanation, just the documents, organized, clear, impossible to misread. I didn't know when he opened it. I only knew when my phone rang. It was late in the day, the light already fading across the backyard, turning the grass a dull gray. I stepped outside to answer, the screen door clicking softly behind me. I saw his name before I heard his voice. Dad. He didn't say anything else right away. I could hear him breathing, uneven, like he was trying to steady it and couldn't. Then it broke. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, controlled crying that slipped through no matter how hard he tried to hold it back. She told me, he started, then stopped. She said you were forgetting things, that you'd gotten confused, that you needed help before something worse happened. His voice tightened again. I thought I was protecting you. I sat down on the back steps, one hand resting against the wood, feeling the grain under my fingers. I know, I said, and I meant it. He flew in 2 days later. No long notice, no discussion, just a message that he was on his way. When he arrived, we didn't hug right away. We sat at the kitchen table first, the same place we had eaten together for years, the same light hanging above us. I laid everything out in front of him, the bank records, the footage, the documents he had signed. I didn't rush him. I let him go through it at his own pace, page by page. At one point he stopped, his hand still resting on the paper, his eyes fixed on something that didn't move. I signed this, he said quietly. Yes, I answered. He nodded once, slow, like he was accepting something that couldn't be undone. I need to fix it. And he did. He contacted the court. He corrected his statement. He put his name next to the truth this time, not the version he had been given. We sat there a while longer after that, neither of us speaking, the room settling into a kind of quiet that felt different from before. Because now that he knew, now that everything had been laid out between us, there was only one question left. Neither of us had said out loud yet. What would happen when Sharon realized he wasn't on her side anymore? The hearing didn't feel dramatic. No raised voices, no sudden turns. It was quiet, procedural, the kind of room where decisions are made in measured sentences. I sat beside Rachel, hands folded, listening as the documents were read into the record. Line by line, the version of me that had been built on paper began to fall apart. The petition was dismissed, not because of emotion, but because the facts didn't hold. The investigation that followed moved more slowly, but it didn't stop. The financial records were clear enough. The transfers, the separate account, the pattern that couldn't be explained away. Sharon accepted a plea in the end: probation, fines, and a court order to return everything that had been taken. Every dollar came back. Anthony Blake didn't walk away clean either. His license was suspended pending further action, his name now tied to something that wouldn't fade quietly. I signed the divorce papers on a gray morning that felt colder than it should have been. The pen moved steadily in my hand. No hesitation, no second thoughts. When it was done, I stepped outside Rachel's office and stood there for a moment, letting the air settle around me. The house felt different after that. Not empty, just quieter in a way I hadn't noticed before. I changed the color of the front door a few weeks later. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to mark that something had ended and something else had begun. If there's anything I've learned, it's this. Family isn't always the safest place. Trust isn't something you can leave unchecked. And money isn't the most dangerous thing in a situation like this. Control is. If you've ever felt something shift in your own life and couldn't explain it, leave a dot in the comments. And if stories like this mean something to you, don't forget to follow along. Because I still think about that moment sometimes, and I can't help but wonder, if you were sitting where I was, would you have spoken up or stayed silent just a little longer?